right there in front of you as you come out of Islam's holiest place. Well, Muslims from the traditional heartlands may just shrug their shoulders at that, but what is the influence of all of this on the young? What happens to a young Muslim student studying at an American university? Perhaps somebody who's been sent here from a rather traditional corner of the world. He learns about postmodernism and post-structuralism, and that these are ideologies of profound influence in the modern West, and that the West is intellectually driven. The journalists have picked up ideas from their teachers picked up ideas from university professors, and all of them are evincing, in a kind of trickle-down fashion, a particular philosophical worldview, about which generally we don't trouble to learn. So this young student learns that these are enormously profound and influential movements in the modern world, and hence the modern global system of which the Muslim world is absolutely a part. And he asks his local Islamic leaders how to disprove them, and when they cannot, or they never even heard of them, he grows confused, and his confidence in Islam as a timeless truth is badly shaken. And under circumstances such as this, really it's inevitable that increasingly only the less intelligent really remain Muslim. In some cases we can see this. It's a filtering process that's already very evident in some activist circles. So it's a religious obligation, a farida, particularly upon those of us living in the West and engaging with the West and its cultural forms on a daily basis, to understand what it's about and to understand the globalizing processes that are going to steam ahead around us and despite us, whether we like it or not. Now, obviously, in the time that remains to me, I'm not going to offer an Islamic diagnosis, still yet a solution to all of the multifarious and very bewildering trends that are going on around us. But I do want to look just at a few representative issues. Not because they can be easily resolved, but because I think they serve to suggest the shape of the challenges that are going to face the Ummah in the next few decades. These three issues I want to talk about are demography, the population situation, religious change, and the environment. Firstly, the demographic issue. Again, something we don't pay much attention to particularly, but of enormous importance because it's inexorable. It's one of the things that's most predictable. Population trends are easily extrapolated, and they have an enormous effect on the course of civilizations. And unless there's some unimaginable catastrophe, a new plague or some nuclear holocaust, almost certainly we can be pretty confident of where the Ummah will be demographically in 30 or 40 years' time. Let's have a look at the figures that are usually offered. At the beginning of the present century, it's estimated quite reliably that around 12.5% of the world's population was Muslim. This was after the Industrial Revolution, which had resulted in an enormous population explosion, essentially in the Christian world, and before the same phenomenon had begun in the world of Islam. In 1980, that figure had risen to 16.9%, and the figure for the end of the millennium, now basically, is put at around about 21%. So this already is a hugely important change, and from our point of view, in terms of raw statistics, if there is safety in numbers, very encouraging. That we should have increased from 13% of the world's population to over 20% of the world's population in 100 years is pretty interesting. Percentages, incidentally, for other religions, generally static. Interestingly, the percentage for atheism over the past 20 years has gone down quite sharply, largely as a result of the rediscovery of religion in the former socialist countries. So these figures are of considerable significance, and even more interesting are the statistics that we can reasonably forecast if we extrapolate them into the years ahead. Samuel Huntington, who is one of the great scaremongers that this country has regrettably produced, I think really not as an Islamophobic agenda. I don't read him as Islamophobic, but rather as somebody who is more interested in directing an internal cultural argument in the United States about multiculturalism. But in any case, he offers figures, well attested, that suggest that by the year 2025, about a quarter of the world's population will be Muslim. And shortly after, the Muslims will become 30%, and at that time, the Muslims will be in absolute terms the most numerous religious community on the planet. That is, probably within the lifetime of many people here, we will find ourselves members of the world's biggest religion, outnumbering all of the thousands of Christian denominations put together. Let me move on a little bit. This rapid increase in Muslim numbers does, of course, have enormous political entailments. It's not that it's going to have immediate results for organizations such as the United Nations, which are not basically democratic organizations insofar as really significant questions relating to global economics, global security, and so forth are taken not by the General Assembly, but by the necessarily Western-dominated Security Council. It's not going to have an immediate effect in that way. But it does have other effects, and perhaps that's one reason why in 1994 the United Nations chose Cairo, the world's most populous Muslim city, as the venue for its population conference. One area of concern is going to be that the new millennium is dawning over a Muslim world that has a population disequilibrium, inasmuch as there is a massively disproportionate number of young people. And any student of history will tell you that has enormous implications for political life as well. Historically, such contexts have invariably bred turmoil, revolution, instability. One explanation, for instance, for the Protestant Reformation in Europe is that in 16th century Germany, for various reasons, there was a preponderance of young people, the result of new agricultural and political arrangements. Also, the growth of fascism in Central Europe in the 1930s is also attributable in large measure to the growth in numbers of young people. Over the border in Islamic history, we find a conspicuous example, again in the 16th century, in the form of the Jalali rebellions, which really shook Ottoman control of the core Ottoman lands. These were young men who simply didn't find any work and hence turned to various forms of political disaffection. And the Islamic revival over the past few years has faithfully reflected this normal historical pattern. One of the useful things that Samuel Huntington does do in his book is to equate the peaking of Islamic radical activity in various countries with the demographic phenomenon. One of the first Muslim countries to reach a peak proportion of youth in the 1970s was Iran, and of course that was the first place where Islamic activism first really became a mass movement. Revolution took place in 1979. In other countries, the peak was reached rather later. So in Algeria, the proportion was reached in 1989, just when the FIS, the main Islamic party there, was winning its greatest support. So those of us who are concerned with the future of the Ummah and with laying down institutional and intellectual frameworks for handling the problems of the future have to contend with this brute fact, a youth bulge that's likely to continue for some time in a number of Muslim societies. The number of people in their early 20s will continue to increase in Egypt, Morocco, Syria, Tunisia, and quite a few other countries. As compared to 1990, in the year 2010,